Shabbos. This week's portion is Vayigash, and in the end of the parsha, we're told about how Yosef saved the people of Egypt from famine and from utter destruction. And from a Jewish perspective, we read it, Yosef the hero. He came up with the idea to save the grain during the years of plenty after he interpreted the dreams of Paro. And then he made sure that he collected it and he dispersed it over the years than the people needed it. And he saved them. But from the Egyptian perspective, there's two ways of looking at it. On the one hand, Yosef saved the people. On the other hand, let's look at the story and how he did it. So it says, in the very beginning, they came to him and they said, we need food. So they said, we'll pay kesef, we'll pay money. Now, on the one hand, you could think, hey, when he was saving it all these years, maybe he should have been saving it as part of sort of the government and the government on behalf of the people. And therefore, when he's dispersing it later, perhaps there shouldn't be a charge. That might be a modern way of looking at it, but it seems that that's not what he did for sure. He took it on behalf of Paro, and now when people came, and it was almost like a tax, now when people came looking for food, he charged them, and they paid for it. And after they paid all the money that they have, they said, we have no more money. They say, well, give us all of your cattle, your donkeys, and all of your animals. And then he owned all of the animals. Then they came back and they needed more food. He says, listen, we gave all of our belongings. We have nothing left. The only thing we have left is our bodies, ourselves, and our land. And they said, okay, we will be like servants or slaves to Pharaoh. And that's exactly what happened. It says that he bought through the purchase of this grain all of the land of Egypt. The only land that he left was the land of the priests. And not only that, but he made the people move around from city to city so that they didn't have any connection to their previously owned land. So he basically took over and created indentured servants for the whole Egypt, except for the priests. And also, it would seem, except for the people in Goshen, which were the Jewish people. It doesn't say that explicitly, but it might somewhat be implied. So if you start thinking from that perspective, when you read later on in Shmos that there was a new Paro who forgot Yosef, you say, that's terrible, how they're not really appreciative of all the good that Yosef did for them. And that's true. But remember, when people give you everything, but they also take control, years later, when you no longer are needy and dependent on that person, or you don't need to be dependent because you're in a terrible situation at that point, what you realize then is that now we're slaves and we've lost our land, we've lost our freedom, we've lost our connection to the cities and the areas which we lived before. And then might be somewhat of a hatred and might be somewhat of a fear, as Paro said. Now they're going to rise up, the Jews are going to rise up against us because they might have been freer and wealthier, and there's many of them, because it says, Pruvu, they were fruitful and multiplied, and they filled up the land of Egypt. So now you have many, we'll call them Jewish people, they're not Jewish at this point, but many Jewish people. The people of Egypt are afraid of these foreigners, and they also are resentful, perhaps, of how Yosef acquired them and their property. So we think of this maybe as the roots of anti-Semitism. And the reason I'm suggesting to look at this in this serious way is that today we have this attitude, or at least it's common attitude, that anti-Semitism is inbred in the DNA of many peoples. And they have a hatred of us for whatever reason, and it doesn't matter, we're never going to change that. There are people today who say the Arabs are always going to hate us. And I'm sure that's what they said about Christians, and today they'll still say it, that, the church has taught hatred of Jews. We know that's changed to a large degree in many different sectors and many different parts and sects of Christianity. But we have this attitude that there's nothing we can do about it. And if you look at this parsha, you start to see, hey, the Egyptians, it wasn't because we are Jewish, It's because, first of all, we were called Ivrim. And Ivrim, the word Ivrim is from the other side, but that was a term in Egypt for foreigners. They looked down at all foreigners, people other than the Egyptians. Not only that, in this week's portion, it says, Yosef told his brothers, tell Paro, you are roe tzon, you are shepherds, and that's all you know how to do. And therefore, he's going to let you have the land of Goshen in the northern part of Egypt, because Gitoavas Mitzrayim kol roe tzon. It's abomination to the Egyptians' shepherds. For whatever reason, it's time for another discussion. They hated shepherds. They hated foreigners. They looked down at them condescendingly. They wouldn't eat. In the previous portion, it says they wouldn't even eat with Yosef because Yosef was a Hebrew and Egyptians didn't eat with the Hebrews, right? Again, Hebrews we think of as Jews, but all foreigners were called Ivrim at that time, and they were just foreigners coming from another land. And then you look back a little further, and we have this idea that Esav always hates Yaakov, and that it's inbred, and all of the descendants of Esav, whether they're literal descendants or they inherited the attitude. Halacha Yadua, we're told that there's halacha, it's known, Esav sonel Yaakov, that Esav hates Yaakov. But when you look at the stories, Esav had a reason to be upset. Esav might have been not such a great person. Maybe he despised the birthright and he sold it for much less than he should have. But at the end of the day, the result is he lost it. The blessings were stolen. The hatred or the jealousy is understandable, just like the jealousy of the other brothers for Yosef. Now, of course, they came to terms, and Esav didn't necessarily come to terms, and other peoples didn't come to terms with us. But when you start to understand this, you say, there are reasons for anti-Semitism. We're not necessarily to blame or always to blame, and it doesn't rationalize or excuse the hatred and the murder that comes from people who are anti-Semitic, who have just tried to murder us for years. And it's understandable that we have that attitude, but I think there's something negative that comes out of that attitude. And that's, no matter what we do, they're going to hate us. We might as well not care. We might as well, sometimes you could take advantage and you say, well, they're going to see, don't worry, they hate us anyway. In Israel, they might say, well, we're going to be nice, we're going to help them. It doesn't matter. The hatred's still going to be there. We might as well play tough. And again, sometimes that's true, and sometimes short-term that's necessary. I'm not a politician, and I'm not even a theologian to say this is the way it always is. This is the way it always was, and there's no way to understand it from a different perspective. But I think it's important to say maybe there are reasons, and therefore maybe even though the anti-Semites of the world have certainly, in a sense today especially, gone crazy, you could say. We don't have to look so far back in history to see that there was no way to stop that hatred, and the hatred was way out of proportion for every little tiny reason that might have existed. But as soon as we understand that there are reasons, we could try to mitigate those reasons. We could try to help our situation. We could try to create a Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification of God's name, that people should look at us in a positive light. An example today is Israel. I know Israel, you could say, is hated all over, but their success brings jealousy. But their success, if used in the right way, could help other people. If the technologies that are developed in Israel are there to help other people, you might argue it's just like Yosef. You're going to help them, but again, they might be subservient in a way. They might have to pay too much. They might have to be too reliant. These are all arguments that could be made, and it's hard to know. But when Israel's sending out rescue teams to Haiti when there's a earthquake, they're just doing it out of the goodness of their heart. Does everyone appreciate it? Maybe not. But those attempts, and I'm not saying they're doing it just to remove anti-Semitism. I think it's inbred within the Jewish people also, and in Israel, is to help other people and to be there when there's a situation which requires your help. If we do that and we have attitudes which try to mitigate those hatreds, we might be successful, maybe not, but that's our job. We have to look at it as our responsibility as individuals, as communities, and even as the nation of Israel. and perhaps a little different attitude of what the source of anti-Semitism is might change that attitude. Good Shabbos.